Today, I'm really pleased to be able to reconvene with Vanessa Warwick. She's a seasoned property investor. She's a landlord, and she's founder of the Property Tribes website, which is a website to support landlords. Vanessa, very nice to see you. How are things in the investor landlord space? Because it's a really interesting time at the moment, isn't it?
My goodness, Phil, I've never known anything like it. I've been investing in property since 1992. And well, I'm actually interested to hear your views on this. All the metrics are going up. Interest rates up, inflation up, house prices up, rents up, cost of materials up.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure you'll agree, Phil, when there's massive house price inflation, it's virtually unheard of to hear of rental inflation at the same time. They normally kind of counterbalance each other, don't they? So very unbelievable market conditions, and clearly how can it be sustainable is the question.
That is the worry. And I imagine your website is inundated with investors, new and old, looking for advice, because we're in uncharted waters, as you say.
It is, and there's so many challenges that continue to face landlords, as we know, and it's really good that they are seeking out, solutions to problems, because that's what a forum is for. It's none of us is as smart as all of us, so they can come onto the forums and Facebook property groups and Move IQ, and they can get information that's going to help them, navigate these very, very uncharted waters.
Yeah. We've been doing some work with Property Mark, and they tell us that a lot of existing landlords are selling up. Is that something that you're seeing on Property Tribes?
Most certainly. I'm aware of the Property Mark research, the work that they are doing in conjunction with a BBC investigation that started to try and find out why landlords are leaving the sector. I think it's been an ongoing trend for probably the last 2 or 3 years. We've obviously had the rollout of the highly unpopular and onerous Section 24 tax regime, which has, put a lot of landlords off. Then we had massive court delays during COVID, and obviously issues with rent payments during COVID. Landlords have just been hammered from all quarters, and a lot of them are leaving. The margins have been really, really slimmed, and I think additionally, a lot of landlords who would perhaps have remained in the game for another 5 to 10 years, they're thinking, actually, prices are really buoyant at the moment. Maybe now I've just had enough and I'm going to sell up, and they're leaving. And new landlords are not coming into the sector in the same numbers that they might have done previously, because they know it's a very, very challenging environment at the moment.
Because the more landlords who sell up, the less rental properties there are, and therefore the rents are increasing. So actually a mass exodus of landlords is a catastrophe for the country. It is, because rents will shoot up. And then, I mean, how many million is it? 5 million people rent in the private sector?
Roughly speaking, yes. But
they need homes. They need somewhere to live.
Tell George Osborne that.
yes. I don't know why I'm
telling the housing minister that, Phil, because this has been what we've been talking about ever since the Section 24 tax regime was introduced into 2015. We've got a massive disconnect with, central government trying to deter landlords, trying to force them out with all legislation, regulation, this tax regime. And then we've got local government absolutely screaming for landlords because they don't have enough social housing, so they have to discharge their housing obligations into the private rented sector. And we're even hearing of local authorities offering landlords what we call golden handshakes or golden welcomes, saying, if you can give us a property, we'll give you £2,500 incentive to bring it to us. So it's very, very poor policy from central government, not actually understanding our sector. And as you know, it's very fragmented. And if you press one lever there, it has a knock-on effect somewhere else, and it just hasn't been properly thought through, in my opinion.
I think I remember talking about this a long time ago, when I understood why the government were making changes to make it less attractive to be a landlord, because they felt that a lot of the landlords were mopping up the typical properties that would have been bought by the first-time buyers, the small flats, the one and the two-bed flats, and there was a lot of noise at the time about first-time buyers being difficult. It was hard for them to get on the ladder. So I kind of understood where the thinking was, but actually they've gone far too far, and they've made it's not attractive. And so not only are not many landlords getting in, those that are in are getting out, and that is going to come home to roost. What do you think can be done? What do you think should be done?
Well, it's a tricky one, because trying to alter government policy, as you know, is like trying to turn an oil tanker. It could take years. I just think that, the housing, the Ministry of Housing and Levelling Up, as it's now called, they need to speak a lot more to industry stakeholders and understand what the issues are, because I think, as you say, the pendulum has swung too far the other way, and it needs to start swinging back to encourage landlords into the sector. But clearly, I think removal of the Section 24 tax regime would immediately turn on the tap again of landlords wanting to get into the sector. And I think just having a better understanding of what the issues really are for landlords, and maybe some encouragement, maybe if they do sell up, that they get discounted capital gains liability if they sell to a first-time buyer. So there are lots of different ways that could be worked to encourage landlords to stay in. But right now, the margins are so slim, and the hassle that comes with it is growing. And that's going to continue to deter landlords, old and new, until that changes.
It's not a pretty situation. I'm very worried about it. I am worried about it, because unless things change, this isn't going to end well. Not for anyone, not for landlords and not for tenants. One of the other things that I was keen to hear your thoughts on, because there seems to be a lot of unknowns or a lot of grey areas, is the situation with the EPCs and what that means for existing landlord-owned property and new ones. And then I get confused about the dates and what comes in when, and then I get confused about whether it's guidance or rules, or where are we at, Vanessa? Please help.
Well, if you're confused, it just shows what a bit of a shambles it is, to be honest, because at the moment, it's not in statute. It hasn't been brought in. It's suggested that it's coming in 2025, I think it is. Landlords are making adjustments for it, but it's very hard to plan a business when you're not 100% sure what the parameters are that you need to be meeting. It really is a trending topic on property tribes. A lot of landlords have C-rated rental properties. They're thinking of selling them up, actually. Another reason that they're going, because typically I think it's been found that the average unsuitably rated property in EPC terms is going to cost between 10 and 13,000 to bring it up to a reasonable C or above. And landlords maybe can't access equity for whatever reason, or don't have the funds to pay for that. And they're just thinking, well, maybe that one's got to go. And that's another one taken out of the rental stock. So I think there needs to be some clarity about it, because at the moment, I think landlords are kind of flailing around in the dark, and they can't plan anything doing that.
Completely agreed. You say some clarity. I'd like a lot of clarity. I read somewhere, in fact, I've read it a couple of places, but again, I don't know whether it's true or not, because I guess the person who wrote it in the papers doesn't know whether it's true or not, but there could be a maximum. That if you had a property that was E-rating, and it was going to cost you 30,000 to bring it up to where it needed to be, maybe you only have to spend 10. But that kind of, maybe there's a maximum of 10 that you have to spend. But if you spend your 10 and it's still only a D rating, I don't know, where does that lead? can you borrow money to buy a property like that? Is that going to affect the mortgage rate that you're able to borrow money at if it's not rated where it should be? It's a deeply complicated topic.
Well, you're absolutely right, and it's good that you mentioned the lending aspect, because lenders are already starting to look at EPC ratings across somebody's portfolio when they're applying for finance now, to see how badly they're going to be impacted by this. So I would imagine that if it does get put into statute, then lenders will not lend on properties that are below a C rating. Then those substandard properties then become having to be bought by landlords for cash or bridging, and then refurbished up to a higher standard, and then re-rated. So I think we're just highlighting here how many different little impacts it's going to have on so many different aspects of landlordism and investing in property.
Yeah. What will it all mean for tenants, do you think?
Well, at the moment, we know that the only way is up for rents. As the stock dwindles, there's more and more people applying for each property. There are reports in the media this week that tenants are starting to offer over asking price. But by the same token, tenant affordability is being stretched with the energy crisis and cost of living crisis. This is why I'm so concerned, Phil, because all of these metrics on up is not healthy. No. It's not going to end well. Something's going to crack, and something's going to give. And a lot of people, whether it's landlords and indeed tenants, are going to be badly affected by it. Yeah, it's very, very concerning.
Oh, Vanessa.
What can we talk that's positive?
It's not a pretty picture. I don't think it's going to end in disaster. But things need to change.
I think they do. There's a lot of negative rhetoric in the media, particularly by Shelter and Generation Rent and some of the tenant unions. I don't think that helps. One thing that I've been doing, Shelter are always saying that one of the biggest causes of homelessness is a landlord serving a Section 21 notice to sell up. One of the things that I've been trying to do is create educational resources around selling a tenanted selling a property as tenanted, so that the tenant remains in their home. It's actually good for everybody in the transaction, because the landlord receives rent up to the day of completion. The incoming landlord receives rent from day one of completion, and the tenant can remain in the property. So I think there could be some more educational resources, maybe working with tenant charities and tenant bodies to encourage landlords to, and it actually, Phil, estate agents as well, they always recommend vacant possession, but you can still get a very fair price for a property with a tenant in situ if you do sell to another landlord. So perhaps if we could all create educational resources to encourage the buying and selling of tenanted properties, I think that would help tenants remain in their home.
Yeah, and it would help, as you said, it would help landlords, and indeed it would help banks, because they know what rent they're getting from day one. So it kind of makes sense.
It absolutely does. It really, really does. I came across a real moral dilemma as well to do with Section 21. This was from a tenant that contacted us on Facebook, actually, and he said that he'd been in his property for a long time, he'd looked after it, always paid his rent on time. He had been served notice because his landlord wanted to house a Ukrainian refugee. Now, that's a really curly one to deal with, don't you think?
Yes, curly one. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. I quite like the turn of phrase. Yeah, that's hard. That's tough. Yeah.
I mean, maybe the landlord just uses this as an excuse, but I hope not. I mean, it's just... I think, in actual fact,
I'm slightly involved in trying to do something with Ukrainian refugees, but the red tape involved in that is excessive from somebody who could potentially help. Anyway,
it's absolutely shocking. You have to crawl over broken glass.
Yeah.
Couldn't have been made more difficult, really. Yeah, again, you're kind of wondering where's the common sense in all of this, you know? There's people out there that want to house Ukrainian refugees. They've got good standard accommodation. And they're just not getting them passed through to be allowed to house them. So again, I'm just going to scratch my head, Phil. I don't have the answers.
Yeah. I've got a property that I want to do some works in at the back end of the year, and I've got builders all lined up, ready to go. And I thought, well, through the summer, that would be really useful for a Ukrainian family. But and the timeline of me being able to help is shortening and shortening. Anyway, we digress. Vanessa, I'm sure we've discussed this in years gone past, but I'm sorry, I'm going to bring the debate up again. Forgive me, but where are things at? Do you see a time where we might get accepted on both sides of the fence much longer tenancies? Could there be a 5-year tenancy? Could there be a 10-year tenancy? Is there a market for it? Is there any traction? It just seems sense to me.
Well, absolutely, because landlords love having a tenant that stays put. I would love to be able to issue 5 or 10-year tenancies. The sticking block is that lenders really only allow a 12-month AST. So that's one of the issues. I can't understand why there isn't more encouragement of longer tenancies, because it's landlord gold if you've got a tenant that wants to stay, 5, 7, 10 years. I've had tenants that have stayed, I think my longest one is 13 years.
Wow.
That's what we want. It costs money every time to chop and change. You can suffer a void.
So the sticking point is the lenders. That's where I need to go and wave
kick
things
some ass.
out. Okay, Vanessa, really appreciate your time and insight as well, because it's very complicated out there, and I think lots of us need to make a bit more noise about it, because it's not easy for buyers or landlords. So best of luck with everything at Property Tribes. Really valuable resource. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's lovely catching up with you again, Phil. Thank you very much. And thank you for everything that you do to help educate the property community. I just think it's so important in these challenging times that people have access to sensible and good advice. So thank you.
You're very welcome.